Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. It is a joy to have you on, the first Chicago Fire Victory Sunday in what feels like way too long. But again, full house here today, so it's a wonderful time to be talking about it. I've got Tim, Allen, and DJ with me. Fellas, we're going to go around the horn. Tim, how are you feeling on Sunday?
Good. It's good to see the Fire back in the win column. Good to see them winning on the road again. I think we'll talk a little bit more about a lot of it, but in the end, you can't really find too much to complain about, right?
A win is a win is a win is a win, right? Allen, you know a lot about winning. Some may say you've won so much you're tired of it. How do you feel?
uh, we're undefeated in Canada this season, so I'm very very happy that we have performed north of the border.
Not just undefeated, but 3 for 3, 3 wins,
3 for 3.
games.
Yeah, we are victorious in Canada.
That's your American side coming out, Alan, when you say undefeated, meaning only wins, as opposed to unbeaten, meaning never lost, right? Fire 3-0 in America's hat, 3-0-0, excuse me. So that's always nice. DJ representing the south of the border as well. How are we feeling down there, bud?
The south of the border.
Yeah, the southern part of the border.
That's not what you said. You said the south of the border.
Yeah,
that makes it sound like
border.
Mexico.
Breaking news.
You know what? Okay, if this was around the horn, I would be muting you right now. You don't get to tell us how your day is going. We're gonna start talking
geez, I don't care.
A little bit of Chicago Fire football. Not too much in the way of news today before we actually jump into the meat and potatoes of the review against Club de Foot Montréal that took place at Stade Saputo last night. The biggest one, the one on everybody's mind that I'm sure everybody will be talking about, is that the transfer line is 4 days away as of recording. It is coming up this Thursday. The transfer window will open for MLS. We've already seen some deals announced. So we're already starting to see certain players come in. So it's possible it could come out between now and Wednesday, but we'll have full coverage both on the website and as a part of our New York Red Bulls preview for this Saturday, talking about the expected transfer window. A couple other pieces of news coming up here. Sam Rogers was injured in the game last night, so obviously don't have a status update on him yet. Knowing his history, would not expect to see him on the bench for next week, but maybe a little bit of a depth test for the Fire at center back. Yet again, Jack Elliott and Chris Brady both making the MLS team of the match day. Jack Elliott a part of the starting 11, Chris Brady on the bench. Jack Elliott obviously coming off a really wonderful performance that included his first goal as a member of Chicago Fire after taking the free kick that set it up. I was not expecting Jack Elliott to be taking free kicks last night, but it was a nice change of pace for a team that we had just talked about being potentially for lack of a better word, stunted in the tactics department. So really great performance for both of those guys. Exciting to see them get the recognition. The last one worth mentioning, we'll talk about it a little bit later on too, but Philip Zinckernagel notched his 10th assist of the season last night. That is the first time in the history of the club that a player for Chicago Fire has 10 goals and 10 assists in the same season. He is now only 9 goal contributions away from setting the single season all-time record for Chicago Fire. Tim Allen, if you guys would like to reflect, I mean, all three of those performances, I feel like we look back at the end of the year, those are probably the three biggest names in terms of what has held the glue of this team together. Jack Elliott, Chris Brady, Philip Zinckernagel, and how those performances kind of contribute to where we are in the dog days of summer a little bit as we get ready for the home stretch of the MLS season.
I mean, I think it's really refreshing to see a squad where it feels like there's a core of players that you can depend on to actually get results rather than seeing a guy do something once and you're like, oh, that was cool. I can't wait for us to start seeing a lot more of that throughout the season. Then it just kind of like fizzles out and goes away, right? Like difference makers, I think, are just essential. And like that's the thing the Fire have lacked, not necessarily at the talent level, but in terms of the performances they're able to put out. And that's the thing that this squad has. It's one more way that this is kind of a different feeling team than the previous few years have been. And I think that like the aspirations of this team kind of come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, any kind of key takeaways or thoughts you want to add?
We did it. Well, we did it in Montreal. And I feel like, yeah, Montreal is bottom of the league. They haven't really been showing up this season. But they had some opportunities that, if it weren't for how well, first of all, Chris Brady is the true Brady GOAT, who is Tom, I don't even know. But if it weren't for him and some spectacular moments from our back line, it could have been a lot more of a closer game, especially on the score line.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I'll tack on, Tim, just to your point of like, it's great to see some difference makers. It's incredible to see difference makers on team-friendly contracts. I mean, Philip Zinckernagel, Max Tam, right? That's not nothing, but I think for his play and his output, you could certainly make the argument that he is a DP level player on a Max Tam contract, right? So, Chris Brady obviously making about what a U22 contract hits at, and Jack Elliott, a bit of a prove it deal, so I would expect to see that rate raise next year, as I don't believe there's a club option for 26.
Yep, there's
But
not.
still a
Yep.
very team friendly
too?
deal, and I would
Jack Elliott?
expect. Yeah, Jack Elliott. No team option on 26. It was a
He has
1
an
year
option.
prove it deal.
Yeah,
He
the
does?
next for next year. Yeah.
No, even
yeah.
better. Thank you, DJ. That's why we keep him around. But yeah, then even better to my point there, right? So really wonderful performance. I would kind of expect to see him get a new deal this offseason regardless, though, to be totally candid.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a big part of the conversation, right? Like there's no way that I think that you perform at this level or named the team captain for what at this point will be a majority of the season, and don't say then pay me like it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, he was starting, or well, no, I guess Kellen was captain early on, but
Yeah.
for basically the entire season. It's a good point, Tim. But yeah, as we mentioned before, Chicago Fire come out victorious in Montreal at Stade Saputo, excuse me. A few changes to the 11 after a pretty heavy rotation recently. Marin Haile Selassie starting over Jonathan Bamba. Planned rest for Bamba. It seemed like he did appear towards the end of the game in the 80th minute. Haile Selassie played on the right. Zinckernagel moved to the left. And we actually saw, I think, for quite a bit of the game, Zinckernagel and Hugo Kuipers having a lot of interplay over there, which we'll talk about later. Thought that was really interesting. Romani Kwame making another start for Sergio Orihel, who was out with yellow card accumulation. We saw Brian Gutierrez move a little more centrally as well. So in some places closer to that 4-2-3-1 than the 4-3-3 we've seen for most of the year. And then, as expected,
It
Leonardo
sort of played like a
Barroso.
4-4-2 in possession at different points with Zinckernagel kind of playing
Yeah.
further up. And at times, Guti was more like a winger. At times, he was more like the like left midfielder rather than a central midfielder in that position. So the fluidity, I think, was kind of interesting. We can talk about how effective we thought it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And then lastly, Leonardo Barroso starting for Jonathan Dean. That seems to kind of be the game plan for Greg at this point, is basically just rotate those guys so Leo's legs stay fresh. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on too. Hugo Kuipers started the scoring early, the 13th minute, after a great individual effort from Leonardo Barroso. He sent one off the woodwork. Hugo put away the rebound. Jack Elliott headed in a corner from Philip Zinckernagel for the insurance goal in the 54th minute. This is a 10 straight road game with a goal contribution for Philip Zinckernagel. He is having quite a year. He's on quite a tear. The Fire did remain dangerous. There were more scoring opportunities, but they could not convert for that third goal. With a number of yellow cards. Mauricio Pineda in the 32nd minute, Sam Rogers in the 36th, Romani Kwame in the 66th. And then, as mentioned before, Rogers did leave with injury just before the end of the first half. Omar Gonzalez replaced him in relief. And the only other, I think, notable piece we saw there was the first extended action for Kellen Acosta. Not unexpected. With Sergio Orihel being out, first extended action since his injury, excuse me. But it was nice to see Kellen back on the field. Some good, some bad, but about what you'd expect from him after that type of absence. And we've alluded to it a little bit, but we'll start the conversation here. The Fire do get the win. They do bust the slump. They make it happen. As Alan, I think you said last week, how do you bust a slump? You win the game. That did happen, but they didn't do it in particularly dominant fashion. I think the big thing, we talked about it last week, was Montreal has actually sold 2 of their defensive starters in the last 14 days. So you're going against a bottom of the league side that is now even more weakened on the defensive front. And you see one of the most high-powered attacks in MLS scoring 2 goals. So Tim, I'll kind of talk to you on your impressions on how the Fire actually looked in this game, how they performed, and if you felt it was more of a, hey, this was a dominant win, it was a great time, or it was, hey, 2-0 should have been like 5-0.
I think that a lot of us were expecting more goals. Like I think that when you look at our predictions for goals from earlier in the week, we were expecting more. I think overall you take it, right? Like you're not going to be up for it every single time in MLS, because I rewatching the match and then talking to Greg afterwards, the team just looked exhausted, right? Like, and that's something that Greg brought up just in the first things that he said to reporters after the match was just that he gives credit to the team because he said there's not a lot of gas left in the tank. And I think that was pretty clearly the case. I think that it showed up with a lot of the ways that we saw guys playing, a little bit with the tactics too. Like the team didn't press as much as they normally do. They sort of like laid off on Montreal more. I think that comes despite the fact that, Montreal, I think, would have been a good team to try to press to give up things, especially considering they gave up two of their best defenders over the past couple weeks and sold them on. But it's not something we saw. I think that was just tired legs. And so I think you sort of say when you've played 390 minutes of competitive soccer in the 2 weeks leading up to the match, you just get the win however they come. And even though the 2-0 scoreline doesn't look super comfortable, and I think being 1-0 for so long kind of made Fire fans have like flashbacks to Wednesday, right? Where like a one goal lead, and then like again didn't turn out to be enough when Atlanta managed to find the late equalizer. But it just felt a lot more comfortable than the game against Atlanta. Like Montreal had some shots, and they had a lot of shots. Nothing really seemed dangerous, and I think that in the end you take it. Everyone was tired. I would have liked to see more. There's a few things I think were parts of longer trends that I think are a little bit concerning, but like the team got the job done. I think you just have to say like that's what you got to do sometimes over the course of a 34 game season.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, what is it? The old, I think it's a Sean Payton adage. It's like the best game in coaching is when you win a game you shouldn't have won, or you win a game and underperform, because you get the win, and then you get to coach them hard because they should have played better, right?
Yeah.
Alan, how are you feeling?
Well, and I think also just one more thing on that. I think that Montreal did also play their game more or less to a T, right? Like I think they had a pretty good strategy coming in against the Fire, and those guys were committed to get a win at home. Like you saw, like they were the first to jump. Like they had also played a bunch of matches. They did not look as tired as the Fire did, or even close to it. And I think that says an awful lot about the way that the team was up for it, in a way that like the Fire, I think, felt more comfortable, certainly had more skill, but Montreal, give them credit to like executing their game plan more or less perfectly. But the Fire still came away with a win despite them doing that, right?
Yeah, and to your point there, Tim, Alan, I'll toss to you right after this. Like I think you also saw that frustration from Marco Donadel, right? Is you can tell how hard this season is wearing on him and his staff. Multiple yellow cards issued to the bench last night. So they did what they could do, but when you are I don't know. Look, when you're Montreal and your big off-season acquisition was Fabian Herbers, like there's only so much you can do. And that's not even a negative against him, but if that's your guy in the off-season, you're probably not doing much. Alan, how are you feeling after last night?
You're Fabian Herbers hate, man. Alan, do not take that.
I think that's
down.
A reasonable take. If you signed like a journeyman utility guy, you're not going to have a great year. Like that's your big player, you're not going to have a great year.
We just see as part of this broader agenda you've got, John.
This anti-Fabian Herbers. The anti-Fabian Herbers. I think he's
perfectly average.
I mean, yeah. So to sort of piggyback off of what was said, you can tell that this was a team that's just played so much. And again, like Tim mentioned, Montreal very much played the style of game they wanted to. This was the subtitle for this match definitely could have been battle for the midfield, because it felt like both teams were just constantly turning over the ball in midfield, or were like right on the edge of their attacking or defensive areas. And it surprisingly, we didn't see more goals, honestly, from either side. I apologize. From either side. It's if it weren't for this sort of experienced backline, especially with Jack Elliott, who made the MLS team of the match day, and of course Chris Brady, who was on the team of the match day bench, it definitely could have been a more of a closer game. Just sort of reiterating.
Yeah. Well, and I think you kind of said that well, Alan. I think two things of one being like Tim, to your point, Montreal was on their game, right? They did execute at times, and Chris Brady was Chris Brady, right? We talked about how much or how important he is to this team, how much they need to give him an actual contract and not just what he's making now. But it is a little concerning that this deep into the season, obviously Sergio Orhel is out, but you've got 2/3 of your starting midfield, and you're competing at a similar level to what the midfield for Montreal is. And no disrespect to those players, of course, but Montreal is a very clear wooden spoon contender. Chicago Fire obviously eyeing a playoff spot, even if it is more in that play-in role. And I think, Tim, you pointed it out last night, or I think I saw you say something to the effect of Romani Kwame isn't playing bad, but he's playing very aggressively not good. And it's one of the few times this year where we've looked at a signing and said, I just like, yeah, that's nope, not really working. He's not bad, but not going to be worth the money.
Yeah, and I think that like when some of his first minutes in a Fire jersey, like he scored a goal that I think opened a lot of eyes, and I think that we haven't seen that consistently since. Injuries may be a factor. He hasn't been quick enough on the ball. Again, like I don't know how healthy he is. As Alex Calabrese pointed out, like he's also very, very one-footed to a point of like you can't really be in a midfield and get away with that through pressure a lot of the time. But to Berhalter and the front office's credit, they were getting pushed a sale, and they said no. We said loan, and we're kind of sticking with that. So it doesn't have to be a permanent move, and I think that like there is a lot of upside with Kwame. Alex Calabrese interviewed him recently, and he did kind of mention that he knows that he's got to play for the contract to stay here, which is something he's trying to do. Didn't really see a lot in it last night. And, like the other thing, though, to your point of did the team really dominate as much as they could have? If the argument is kind of they played down to their opponent a little bit, even though I think that looking back at the saves that Brady made, they were pretty comfortable, and he looked acrobatic doing them, but I think that the angles were pretty comfortable for him. They didn't look like it was absolute clutch saves a lot of the time. If the team played down to the opponent a couple times this week, they also sort of played up to the opponent in some pretty close losses to, FC Cincinnati, San Diego, even like Nashville, if we want to go back to the middle of June, where they, other than Nashville, those were all 1-goal losses. And so you got to give them credit for that. They didn't get the results there. They did here. And like, that's the difference. And maybe that just says exactly where this squad is overall in terms of like the roster build and the development in the first year under Berhalter. But, it isn't like they have consistently been playing anything close to the level that I think we are afraid that they were showing against Montreal.
Yeah, very, very true. I think the frustration is there is, how do I phrase it? The top of the East is incredibly compacted. The first 9 teams in the East are all at least good, right? And Chicago Fire right now are 9th in the East, right? Are they 9th or 10th? I don't have the table in front of me. Apologies. They're 10th.
Yeah, they're 10th.
So just below the playoff line. They're all good. Like that, the worst I think of the 7, 8, 9, 10 is probably Charlotte, which is ironic because they're in the 7th spot right now. But they've gotten to play Atlanta twice. I think that's kind of all that is. Sorry, I say all that to say like it's very compact, and then there's an incredibly steep drop off. I think after that 10th, maybe 11th spot, we're already seeing New England start to kind of bow out of that conversation. So I do feel
there's starting to be a gap, right, of teams in the points as well. Like the Fire are right there; they have a game in hand on a lot of the pack. And then there's I want to say a 7-point gap to the Revs behind them, and like that's not a ton, right? Like you have the Fire don't have any more midweek games, but like you have like a bad couple of weeks and they have a good couple of weeks and then you're neck and neck. But I think that it's also not just the standings, but like the eye test and sort of like the vibes test and the way the results have flown for these teams. It's sort of like there's sort of a 1 through 5, sort of like 6 through 10 with some gradation in that. And then there's a drop off of like these teams are not making the playoffs unless something drastic changes, both for them as well as for at least one of the teams above them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think I say all that to say, right, which is the idea of like they may be closer in the table. They are not closer in terms of where they're at as teams. And Tim, I think you said it well. It's just kind of all you can actually ask for after one transfer window, right? And we obviously will talk more about the transfer window opening on Wednesday, as alluded to before. Kind of moving on a little bit, we did see some rotation, as mentioned before, and most notably Sergio Argel out due to a suspension for yellow card accumulation. Jonathan Bamba getting some much needed rest. And the Fire did change shape a bit and ultimately kind of performed well. So I think two thoughts here, right? I know we've talked a lot about A, Jonathan Bamba needs the rest. B, how much do you actually give him? How organically can you work that in while still being competitive? I think my two biggest takeaways from this game were, one, I think you can give Jonathan Bamba 2 or 3 weeks off, including this one. I think he could play 30 to 15 minutes in the next two games before coming back into the starting lineup. Let Marin have some run. Best case scenario, Marin plays well, Bamba gets refreshed. Worst case scenario, Marin doesn't play well, Bamba doesn't finish that stint, you know? And the other side of the coin too, and we can kind of talk about these separately, but I think I'd rather be starting Omar Gonzalez than Sam Rogers. Am I crazy for that? I think he's played much better than I expected him to personally. And Tim, I see your lips moving, but I think you muted
Sorry,
yourself.
I think that Sam Rogers has also played a lot better than I expected him to play, if we're being honest. Like
Yeah.
his first year in the league, and just the profile that he'd had, talking to some people that were familiar with him as a player coming up to Seattle, they sort of thought by the time that he left, where they projected him was maybe like, third or fourth spot on the depth chart at center back on an MLS team. And there's not a lot of MLS teams that have that deep of a center back pool, right? Just given the roster sizes. So the fact that he has been a quasi competent starter, I think says a lot about his play. I thought he had a really good game midweek. But he just isn't a permanent option at that position if the team is going to do what they think that it needs to do. And I think Omar Gonzalez had a couple of missteps here and there, and he will. And I think that there were some positioning issues that we saw in this one as well. But in the end, like, he's a guy that was a USMNT player, like kind of like the most heralded U.S. center back of sort of like his generation, now kind of like at the end of his generation for sure, which is why you don't want to rely on him for a ton of minutes. But there's a lot of that doesn't sort of like get lost with age. And, I think that that's sort of what we saw when he came in for Rogers, who, again, like it sucks that the injuries have bit the center back pool as much because there's a lot we don't know. Both about, where Rogers would be without them, where Tehran would be if he'd been able to be playing and stuff like that.
Yeah, Alan, we'll wrap on Rogers and Gonzalez, and then we'll talk more about Bamba. How are you feeling watching I guess we saw both, right? That Rogers and Gonzalez last night.
Well, I mean, of course, I think for a lot of people, the red card from the Open Cup is still fresh to mind when it comes to his most recent performance. But like mentioned, I'm pretty sure he won MLS like Defender of the Year or the season a few years ago. 4 years ago.
He's won it 4 times in his career.
He's won it 4 times in his career. So, wow, incredible. And he's very much experienced in Major League Soccer, and he's been a part of the United States men's national team. So definitely someone that you can rely on for a bit. And I also agree with Tim on the fact that it's kind of our center back position is just weird because of the fact that Carlos Tehran is just... he plays for a bit and then he's injured for a decent amount of time. So
sure, but like, how much tape do we need to like? How many times do we have to see Carlos Tehran injury to have enough tape on the fact that like that's sort of like who he is? The same way that there's some guys like a midfielder that is like, oh wow, that guy can do some pretty impressive stuff, and then just does stuff that you're like, that was the stupidest thing I've seen a professional soccer player do. How did you do it? Right? Like it's all part of the package. And I think the injuries with Carlos Tehran, after having seen this many of them, like that's part of the package with Carlos Tehran.
Yeah. It's essentially, there's of course some things that still need to be worked out. But I mean, I'm also on the side of Sam Rogers is still, I mean, how old is he? question mark, 26 years old.
26, yeah.
So I mean, he's doing all right. So we'll see what happens honestly during this off season as well as the transfer window, if there can be any additions or whatnot done in that
Yeah, and I
department.
mean, like Greg Berhalter has identified that as a position that they're looking closely at with the transfer window. Like Sam Rogers is, not quite at the senior minimum salary, but he's pretty close to it. He's speaking to him. I think that he's identified going back to Europe as something that he would like to do. So like that's a possibility going down the road, but like I don't think it's a big surprise to anyone that considering the number of goals the team has given up, and just considering how much better Jack Elliott has looked at times when he's had a comfortable partner next to him, which hasn't been that often. If they could clone Jack Elliott and just play two of them, I think that this team probably has 15 fewer goals given up at a minimum.
Yeah, 100%. And look, Tim, I agree with what you said about Sam, right? Better than I expected, but I still think ideally he's your third. Best case scenario, he's your fourth because Christopher Cupps is awesome at 17 years old, right? Which we've kind of seen a little bit when he's healthy. So ideally, yeah, would like to see him being the third, maybe fourth guy in a perfect world. And then also, yeah, Carlos Duran, his contract runs through 2026 with a team option for 27. I wouldn't expect him to be bought out, but I would be shocked if he got a contract extension unless he played a full season and was great in 26. And even then, you're probably just triggering the option, right? The other side of the coin, and we won't spend a ton of time on this, but I am kind of curious on your guys' thoughts. What does Bamba's next month look like, right? Do we see him making a fuller? Is this going to be an extended period of time where he's going to be out of the lineup, or is this more hey, you got your rest. There's no more midweek games this year. Go out there, play week in, week out, be the guy we want you to be.
I think especially with the break coming up after next Saturday's game, and we'll preview that later in the week.
Yeah.
I'd be very surprised if he was not in the starting 11 against the Red Bulls on next Saturday. And, after that, there's a 2-week break, right? And I think that if we see how he looks after a week when he'd been, heavily rested, he did play, but, and I think that, if it's not different after just like an 11-minute performance or something like that against Montreal, I think then we have a few questions we're curious about, and then we see how it looks on the other end of the Flyers break. And if we don't start seeing at least an extra quarter step in his step, I think then we start asking more questions about whether he really needs more rest going forward.
Yeah, Alan, I'll toss to you in a sec. The one point I'd or not push back on, but disagree is like I actually think the break after this week makes it more likely he doesn't start against New York. Right? In my mind, like give him an extra week. He's going to get a full week off. I'm not saying don't even include him on the the bench, right? But ideally let him play for 15 20 minutes at the end of the game just so he stays fresh, but get that extra rest. Let Marin keep playing. His legs are fresh. He's barely played this year. Alan, how are you feeling Bamba sub Marin wise?
I can see both sides of the argument, and I guess I'm sort of leaning more towards what you're saying, John. I wouldn't mind Bamba getting that extra rest, especially with how much Marin Haile Selassie has proved himself with this team, and he has shown in recent games how well he could do. I wouldn't mind if Bamba got that little bit extra rest, and then for that game that's upcoming against New York Energy Drink, for him to get like a little bit of time on.
Yeah, the New Jersey energy drinks. Actually.
The New Jersey energy drink. I apologize.
The New Jersey Sports Illustrated energy drinks now.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the last little bit of tea to talk about, because I'm legally obligated to work Jonathan Dean into every segment the way ESPN is obligated to talk about the Dallas Cowboys every day. I actually thought last night was kind of a perfect example of what I think Greg wants that fullback room to look like, right? And so I thought it was worth discussing. We saw Gutman and Barroso starting. We saw Leonardo Barroso playing, I think, the best since he's come back from injury, right? Obviously added on that assist, which I don't love that it's counted as an assist, but he did almost score, so I'm okay with it, right? Obviously wasn't intended to pass off the woodwork. but Gutman on the left, Barroso on the right, Dean kind of
At the
being that
very
defensive
least,
replacement.
he should get the secondary MLS assist on it, and the woodwork gets the
Yeah.
primary.
There we go. There we go. It's a hockey assist, but it still counts for MLS.
Woo!
But no, I do actually love that rotation. I think it's a perfect use of a guy like Jonathan Dean, where he can play comfortably on the left and right. He kind of is more defensively focused, but has some ability going forward. We saw him play a perfect sliding pass right across goal. If only anyone was at the back post late in the game, right? Um, Obviously, one big hole in the center back room, right? But it does look like the rest of that back line is ready to come together. Tim, am I insane or am I in the membrane, as it were?
I think that there's definitely the pieces there. Again, we'll get into this with the transfer discussion, but there's not going to be a ton of movement without some subtraction, at least in the Fire's roster, just given how full it is. And I don't think that's really a space that you really worry about because of exactly all the things you said, because we've seen Omari Glasgow show some interesting stuff from that position too. I wouldn't, say, well, let's pencil him in as a starter for 3 games in a row. But just to have those options. And, I think that that's kind of enough for the team to be doing what it needs to do in that position for the time being.
Absolutely. Alan, any thoughts you want to add on the fullback discussion?
I'm insane in the membrane. Sorry, I have that stuck in my head. I mean, I feel like with fullbacks, ever since we bidded adieu to one Arnold Suke, I feel like it's the room has improved, and I really enjoyed. I mean, first of all, I want to just give a shout out to Andrew Gutman. I mean, I feel like he's been doing pretty well, and Leonardo Barroso. I feel like they just complement each other on both sides of the wing backs. I just love seeing the energy and the pace that they put into the attack, as well as into defensive areas. Could be a little bit, I think
Gutman has been like lights out. I think for a lot of the season, it was stuff like interruptions and stuff. I think against Montreal, he had one of the worst performances we've seen in that regard from him this year.
Mm-hmm.
He just looked tired, man. And I think that was reflected by the fact that this was one of the first games, I want to say the first game in a month or so, that he hasn't gone 90 minutes, taken off, 63rd minute. So
or
one of the
that
earliest.
needs a break.
Yeah, and I think that's what we saw. So it's not just Jonathan Bamba that we're talking about, although he's like the primary one, having played in Europe and stuff like that previous season. But it's a lot of these guys just need a little bit of time to recover in a way that you can't in a day.
They need a warm blanket and some chocolate.
Probably not actually what the team will be using.
Sure,
but,
fine, why not?
We'll put that forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will personally go to Greg with that.
I wanted to pull this up.
The chocolate takes the place of a foam roller.
This is officially the most starts for Andrew Gutman in an MLS season. He is 2 games away from passing the most games he has ever played in an MLS season. And he is, by halftime against New York Red Bull, he will have played more minutes than he has ever played in a single season. So, Tim, to your point of he's tired, he has literally never played this much. He is already, 45 minutes away from the most 90s he's ever played, which I guess makes sense in terms of minutes. But yeah, so to ask a guy like Andrew Gutman to go out and play 34 games when the most he's ever even appeared in is 25, worth noting, right?
Well, it's also the way that he's playing them, right? Like he's jump starting parts of the attack. He is racing down the pitch with the ball at certain points, and then he's back the other way like 15 seconds later defending. And that's a lot of running.
That's the point, right? Is like you're not just asking him to be a body on the field for 90 minutes a night. He's arguably one of the most important players, in terms of what he adds on both sides of the ball. The only concern I think this raises more long-term for me, right, looking into 2026 and beyond, when we expect this team to be more competitive, is you better have a really solid partner next to Jack Elliott, because you're playing 2 guys who their job is to get forward, right? And it doesn't seem like Greg is leaving any midfielders back. He's actually traditionally using the most 6-ish, right, midfielder Mauricio Pineda as kind of the key pressing point for large portions of the game. So I think that could kind of contribute to, if I were given 40 goals this year, I don't expect that to be the case next year. But it wouldn't shock me if there were a high-performing team with a low goal differential, right?
And I think that that's sort of like what we've seen so far. And like again, it's sort of baked in. I think that you look for improvement. And look, if Greg Berhalter can find one like high to top level MLS center back every window from here on out, like the team is going to be absolutely stocked before very long. So it's you have to like look at the trajectory and where you're starting from and where you're going. And there's a lot of things that could be improved with this team and almost every team, but I think that they're in a pretty good space to make some big strides. Like in a way, it's sort of nice to have such a big glaring problem that you're like, well, there's the thing we need to fix, as opposed to things aren't quite where we need them to be, and we don't really know how to add without subtracting at the same time. There's an obvious place to add here.
100%.
The fridge is going to be stocked for months.
Yeah, we got so much in the fridge. We need the garage fridge now. That's what we need. And look, Tim, what I will say, it's like, can he bring in one MLS starting caliber center back? Like, it's really easy to bring a guy in when he's already sitting on your bench. If you told me Christopher Cupps was Jack Elliott's partner for 30 or 34 games next year, if his body can keep up with it, obviously he's still young, he needs to acclimate, I wouldn't be shocked. In limited time, he's looked outstanding.
And I think that I agree with you, but I think that, and I've, talking to Greg about this a little bit too, part of it is you want him to be an option. You want to give him the opportunity to do that. You do not want to make that the expectation, because there will be ups and downs. And if you start putting him in situations where you realize he's uncomfortable, sometimes he may need to take just like a little step back and reset physically, mentally, some combination of all of those things. If there's not someone that can take the spot that you feel is comfortable with, then that can actually set a guy's development back, especially at this early stage. 2 years down the line, we're probably not having this conversation, although, who knows, 2 years down the line, we could not be not having this conversation because Christopher Cupps is playing for a team in the Champions League in Europe. But, it's still, you don't want that to be the expectation. You need to have another, like, competent partner for Jack Elliott, and then it's a nice problem for the team of how do we play all these excellent players together rather than like what do we do to fix this problem.
Maybe you move to a back three. Tough to say. Maybe Jack Elliott, or not Jack Elliott, maybe Christopher Cupps will be playing in the Champions League for the biggest club in West London. Shout out Queen's Park Rangers. But that feels as good a place to end it.
All right, this podcast is drunk. Yeah,
feels good a place to end it as any other.
We're drunk on 3 p.m. on a Sunday. Yep.
We're drunk on Julian Steffen taking us all the way up, baby. But as mentioned before, we'll have some awesome midweek coverage, not only for the game the match at New York Red Bull this week. Excuse me. At the New Jersey Energy Drinks this weekend, but also for the transfer window, which opens Thursday. So we'll be recording on Wednesday, day before it goes live, and then Thursday the episode will come out, and you will have all of our thoughts and predictions as well as all of the actual news. So you'll be able to not only learn how we feel and get some insight, but also point and laugh when all of us are wrong right away. Gotta love it. But as always, please stay tuned to the website. Not only will there be the pod talking about it, you can find everything on the site from all our writers, Tim, Max, Alex, all that kind of good stuff, to keep you updated with the actual news of it all outside of the opinion and analysis talk. And also on social media, Instagram, Twitter, really just those two. It's Men in Red 97. You can also follow us at MIR97pods on Twitter. That's where you'll find all the podcast specific updates. That's the one they let me log into. They don't let me have the main one, unfortunately. But that'll just about do it. Everybody's laughing at me. But for Tim, for Alan, for DJ, for our illustrious producer Austin, who's actually getting a much needed break, thank you so much for being here and joining us around the bonfire. Come on, you Men in Red.